I have always been the kind of person who values peace and privacy above all else. When I purchased my modest ranch-style home in Oakwood Heights 3 years ago, the quiet streets and well-kept yards were exactly what I was looking for. My neighbors seemed friendly enough, mostly keeping to themselves but offering a wave or nod when our paths crossed. That was until I met Corinne Winters, the woman who lived 2 doors down from me. For the first year, everything was fine. I paid my bills on time, maintained my yard according to neighborhood standards, and generally lived a quiet life. Then came the mysterious spike in my water bill. At first, I dismissed it as a seasonal increase. Perhaps I had watered my lawn more during the summer drought. But when the bill remained unusually high for 3 consecutive months, I knew something was not right. I remember sitting at my kitchen table, bills spread out before me, comparing the numbers from previous years. The increase was significant, nearly double my normal usage. I called the water company to report what I assumed was a leak somewhere on my property. They sent out a technician who checked my pipes, fixtures, and water meter. His conclusion was surprising. "Your system is tight as a drum," he told me, scratching his head. "No leaks anywhere that I can find, but something is definitely using a lot of water here. The meter does not lie." That weekend, I decided to conduct my own investigation. I woke up early on Saturday morning and walked the perimeter of my property, looking for any sign of water seepage or unauthorized connections. What I found made my blood run cold. There, partially hidden by a row of decorative shrubs that lined the side of my house, was a green garden hose. It was connected to my outdoor spigot and snaked its way through the bushes toward my neighbor's yard. I followed the hose, my heart pounding with each step. It led directly to Corinne Winter's backyard, where it disappeared beneath her wooden fence. Climbing onto a garden bench for a better view, I peered over the fence. The hose connected directly to her hot tub, a large, expensive model that could easily fit 6 people. And there she was, Corinne herself, adjusting the temperature controls while the tub filled with my water. For a moment, I stood frozen in disbelief. This woman, whom I barely knew, had been stealing my water for months. I took several photos with my phone as evidence, then walked around to her front door and rang the bell. When Corinne answered, her expression shifted from annoyed to momentarily surprised before settling into practiced indignation. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking down at me from her position on the porch. "Yes, I would like to talk about the garden hose that is connected to my outdoor spigot and is currently filling your hot tub," I stated, showing her the photos on my phone. Corinne's perfectly penciled eyebrows rose slightly, but she showed no real concern. "Oh, that old thing. I have been borrowing a bit of water. What is the big deal? We are neighbors after all." "The big deal is that you have been stealing from me for months without permission. My water bill has doubled, and I would like you to reimburse me," I explained, trying to keep my voice steady despite my growing anger. Corinne laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Do not be ridiculous. It is just water. Besides, you have that side of the house facing away from the street. I figured you would not mind helping out the HOA board president." She emphasized the last part deliberately. "I do mind, and I would like payment for all the water you have used," I insisted. Her face hardened then, all pretense of neighborliness vanishing. "You know what? I do not appreciate your tone or these accusations. If you continue to harass me, I will have to report you to the HOA committee for creating a hostile neighborhood environment." With that, she closed the door in my face, leaving me standing there in shocked disbelief. As I walked back to my house, I noticed the water was still flowing through the hose to her hot tub. She had not even bothered to disconnect it. To understand the full significance of Corinne's threat, You need to know more about her position in our community. Karen Winters was not just any neighbor, she was the self-appointed dictator of Oakwood Heights. As president of the Homeowners Association Board for the past 4 years, she had transformed what should have been a service position into a personal fiefdom. I quickly learned from other neighbors that Karen was infamous for her clipboard patrols. Every Tuesday and Saturday morning, like clockwork, she would march through the neighborhood with a measuring tape and camera, documenting any possible violation of HOA rules she could find. Grass half an inch too tall, violation notice. Trash can visible from the street the day after collection, violation notice. Holiday decorations up one day past the arbitrary removal date. You guessed it, violation notice. Her favorite targets were new homeowners who were still learning the extensive and often arbitrary rules of our HOA covenant. I recalled my own first encounter with Karen just weeks after moving in, when she left a notice on my door about my mailbox being non-standard beige, instead of the approved desert sand color. The difference was imperceptible to the normal human eye, but Karen had somehow detected it and demanded I repaint it within 72 hours. Her position on the HOA board gave her power that she wielded mercilessly. The other board members, mostly retirees with little interest in conflict, generally deferred to her judgment on enforcement matters. This created a culture of fear where residents avoided crossing Karen at all costs. After our confrontation about the water theft, I decided to follow proper channels to address the issue. I carefully documented everything with photos, videos, and copies of my water bills showing the unusual increase. I even set up a small security camera pointed at my outdoor spigot to catch her in the act. The footage I collected over the next 2 weeks was damning. Karen would wait until I left for work, then connect her hose to my water line. Sometimes she filled her hot tub, other times she watered her elaborate garden or filled a small decorative pond. I estimated she was using hundreds of gallons of my water weekly. I compiled all this evidence into a folder and submitted a formal complaint to the HOA board, requesting reimbursement for the stolen water and assurance that the theft would stop immediately. I expected action. What I got was silence. 3 days after submitting my complaint, I received an email stating that my issue would be considered at the next quarterly board meeting in 2 months. When I protested the delay, I was told that non-emergency matters followed the standard timeline for review. That was when Karen's retaliation began in earnest. The day after my protest email, I received my first violation notice. Apparently, my garbage can had been placed 18 inches from the curb instead of the regulation 24 inches. The next day, another notice claimed my front door needed repainting due to visible fatting. By the end of the week, I had received 5 separate violation notices, each carrying a $50 fine. The harassment extended beyond paperwork. Late-night noise complaints were filed against me, despite the fact that I lived alone and was usually in bed by 10. Anonymous reports about suspicious activity at my house led to uncomfortable visits from local security patrols. Each time I left for work, I would return to find something else wrong: garden ornaments moved, porch furniture rearranged, or once my newspaper scattered across the lawn. During this time, Karen continued to steal my water with impunity. The security camera I had installed to monitor my spigot mysteriously stopped working one afternoon while I was at work. When I checked the device, I found that someone had deliberately repositioned it to face the sky. The final insult came at the monthly neighborhood gathering, where Karen publicly introduced me to another resident as our newest problem neighbor who does not understand community standards. When I tried to defend myself, several board members quickly changed the subject or walked away. It became painfully clear that the system designed to protect homeowners had been completely corrupted and weaponized against anyone who dared to challenge Karen's authority. That night, I sat in my living room looking at the growing stack of violation notices and the most recent water bill, which had climbed even higher. The HOA board had failed me. The community had abandoned me to Karen's vindictiveness. I was alone in this fight, with the system firmly stacked against me. By the third month of this ordeal, the financial burden was becoming serious. My water bills now totaled over $600 in excess charges, and the accumulated HOA fines for fabricated violations exceeded $800. For someone on a modest teacher's salary, these costs were not insignificant. I had begun skipping my weekly takeout dinner, a small luxury I had always enjoyed, just to help cover the unexpected expenses. After Karen tampered with my security camera, I installed a new one in a less obvious location, hidden inside a fake rock garden ornament positioned near the spigot. I made sure this one had night vision capabilities and motion detection alerts sent directly to my phone. For 3 days, the camera captured no activity. Then on the 4th day, while I was teaching my 3rd grade class, my phone buzzed with an alert. The footage showed Karen not just reconnecting her hose to my spigot, but actually removing the security camera I had originally installed and tossing it onto my back porch with deliberate force, breaking the lens. This was no longer just theft. It was now vandalism and destruction of property. That weekend brought matters to a head. I was grading papers at my dining room table when I heard unusual noise from outside, laughter, splashing, and music. Looking out my window, I saw Karen hosting what appeared to be a pool party. At least 8 people were gathered around her hot tub, drinks in hand, music playing loudly from portable speakers. And there, in plain sight, was my garden hose running from my house to her yard, filling the hot tub for her guests. The brazenness of it, the absolute disregard, ignited something in me. I grabbed my phone and began recording as I walked across my lawn and into her yard. The party grew quiet as people noticed me approaching, camera in hand. "Excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You are using my water without permission. Again. I have asked you to stop and you have refused. I have documentation of months of water theft, and I am requesting that you disconnect my hose immediately and compensate me for what you have taken." Karen, wearing an expensive designer swimsuit and holding a mimosa, looked at me with utter contempt. "Oh, look, everyone, it is the neighborhood tattletale. Did you know he has been harassing me for weeks, completely unhinged?" Her friends, most of whom I recognized as fellow HOA board members or their spouses, laughed on cue. One man, whom I knew to be the HOA treasurer, shook his head. "Come on, man. It is just a little water. Why make such a big deal about it?" "Because it is theft," I responded, holding up my phone to show them the footage. "And it has been going on for months." Karen stepped forward, water dripping from her designer swimsuit. "You know what your problem is. You do not know how things work around here. This is a community where we help each other out. Sometimes I need a little water, and in return, the HOA does not scrutinize every little violation on your property too closely." She smiled, but the threat was clear. When I did not back down, her friends formed a literal wall between us, arms crossed, expressions contemptuous. "You should leave now," one woman said. "This is private property and you are not invited." The following Monday, I took the evidence to the local police station. The officer who reviewed my case was sympathetic but ultimately unhelpful. "Look," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I understand your frustration, but this is what we call a civil matter. The water line is on your property, and there is no proof she damaged your camera. It could have fallen. Your best bet is small claims court or working through your HOA. Desperate, I consulted an attorney, who reviewed my documentation with interest, but then delivered the bad news. You have a solid case for small claims court, she explained. But between filing fees, my retainer, and the time you will need to take off work for the hearings, you are looking at spending well over $2,000 to potentially recover less than $1,500 in damages. And that assumes the judge rules entirely in your favor. That night I sat alone in my darkened living room, watching through the blinds as Corinne and her friends continued their hot tub party. The laughter that drifted across the yards felt like a personal mockery. My water meter was spinning, adding dollars to my next bill with every passing minute. I had tried everything the right way: documentation, HOA channels, police, legal consultation, and had nothing to show for it except mounting bills and frustration. Something fundamental changed in me that night. I watched the bubbling hot tub filled with my stolen water and made a decision. If the system would not deliver justice, then I would have to create my own solution. The thought should have disturbed me, but instead it brought a strange sense of calm. In that moment of clarity, I whispered a single word to myself: enough. I was done playing by rules that only seemed to apply to me. It was time for Corinne to learn that actions have consequences, even for those who believe themselves above the rules. The seed of an idea, elegant in its simplicity, poetic in its justice, began to take root in my mind. Once I made the decision to take matters into my own hands, I approached the situation methodically, just as I would prepare a lesson plan for my students. This would not be a rash act of revenge, but a carefully calculated response designed to achieve specific objectives. I wanted three things: to stop the water theft, to receive compensation for what had been taken, and to ensure Corinne faced consequences for her actions. My first step was research. I spent hours online learning about plumbing systems, water pressure regulators, backflow preventers, and the mechanics of outdoor water lines. I watched video tutorials, read technical manuals, and studied diagrams until my eyes burned from screen fatigue. I needed to understand exactly how water moved through my property before I could intervene in that flow. During my research, an idea began to form. What if, instead of trying to prevent Corinne from accessing my water line, I modified what came out of it when she connected her hose? The concept was elegant in its simplicity. Let her take the water, but ensure it was not the water she expected. That led me to my next area of research: sewer pumps and gray water systems. I discovered that small transfer pumps designed for basement sump applications could be repurposed for my needs. However, I needed to ensure that whatever I did would not violate any health codes or environmental regulations. The last thing I wanted was to create legal liability for myself. I reached out to my college roommate, Marcus, who now worked in wastewater management for the county. Over beers at a bar far from our neighborhood, I outlined my situation in hypothetical terms. "So hypothetically," Marcus said, swirling his beer thoughtfully, "if someone wanted to redirect gray water, like from a washing machine or shower, through an outdoor spigot on their own property, there would not be any environmental violations as long as the water remained on their property or flowed into an appropriate drainage system." And what about the legality of someone else then taking that gray water without permission? I asked. Marcus chuckled. "Well, hypothetically, if someone stole water from your spigot, they would be taking whatever comes out of that spigot. The responsibility would be on the thief, not the homeowner. But," he added with a serious look, "you could not use actual sewage or black water. That would cross several health code violations." This conversation gave me the parameters for my plan. I would not use actual sewage, but I could create a simulator using safe but unpleasant ingredients that would mimic the appearance and odor. The system would need to be installed entirely on my property and would need to activate only when the specific pattern of water usage matching hot tub filling was detected. Over the next 2 weeks, I acquired the necessary components, being careful to shop at different hardware stores to avoid suspicion. I purchased a small sump pump, pressure sensors, electronic valves, a timing control unit, a 50-gallon plastic drum, and various plumbing fixtures and connectors. I also bought several perfectly legal but incredibly foul-smelling compounds used for plumbing training exercises. Substances that simulated the odor of sewage without containing any actual harmful materials. My garage became a workshop where I assembled and tested components. The design evolved through several iterations, but the core concept remained the same. I would install a parallel water line connected to my outdoor spigot. Under normal use, clean water would flow. But when sensors detected the specific flow pattern and duration associated with filling a hot tub, high volume, continuous flow for more than 20 minutes, a valve would redirect the flow from the clean water line to my alternative supply. That alternative supply would come from the 50-gallon drum filled with water treated with the odor compounds and non-toxic coloring agents. The drum would be buried in my yard, out of sight, but connected to the system. The sump pump would draw from this reservoir rather than the clean water line, sending the concoction through the same hose Karen had been using. Crucially, the system included a one-way valve to prevent any backflow into my home water system. I also installed a manual override that would allow me to disable the entire setup with the flip of a switch hidden in my garage. Safety and legality were paramount. I wanted justice, not a lawsuit or criminal charges. The technical aspects were challenging but manageable with careful study and precision. I created a testing rig in my garage that simulated the outdoor spigot and confirmed that the valve switching mechanism worked flawlessly. I calibrated the pressure sensors to ignore normal water usage like garden hose watering or car washing, but to trigger the system when the specific flow pattern of hot tub filling was detected. After 2 weekends of work, I had a functioning prototype. The final design was elegant in its simplicity. From the outside, nothing would appear different about my outdoor water spigot. The modifications would all be underground or hidden within my garage. To anyone observing, even Karen herself, it would seem that she was still successfully stealing my clean water. The night before implementation, I sat at my kitchen table reviewing every aspect of the plan once more. Was this ethical? Was I becoming as bad as Karen by resorting to such measures? I wrestled with these questions for hours. But then I remembered the months of theft, the harassment, the financial burden, and the complete failure of every proper channel to deliver justice. This was not my first choice. It was my last resort. With my decision reaffirmed, I made final adjustments to the system and ran a complete test. The pressure sensor correctly identified high-volume flow, the valve switched appropriately, and the pump delivered the specially treated water exactly as designed. Everything was ready. Now all I needed was for Karen to do what she had been doing for months, steal my water to fill her hot tub. And knowing her weekend routine, I would not have to wait long. The installation of my modified plumbing system had to happen under cover of darkness. On a moonless Thursday night, I began the work at 11:00 p.m. when most of my neighbors were asleep. The only sound was the occasional distant bark of a dog and the soft scrape of my shovel against soil as I carefully excavated the area around my outdoor water line. Working by the dim light of a headlamp set to its lowest setting, I dug a narrow trench that would house the additional pipe and valve system. The 50-gallon drum was the most challenging component to install discreetly. I had prepared a hole for it earlier in the week, disguising the work as a garden project. Just installing a new decorative boulder, I had told curious neighbors. The drum now sat nestled in that hole, its top just below ground level, covered with a layer of mulch and bordered by ornamental grasses. From above, it was completely invisible. Inside the drum was 30 gallons of water treated with the special non-toxic but incredibly pungent compounds that would mimic sewage in appearance and smell. I connected the drum to my new valve system, carefully soldering connections and testing pressure at each joint. By 3:00 a.m., the physical installation was complete. I then moved to the electronic components, the pressure sensors that would detect water theft and the control unit that would activate the valve switching mechanism. These I housed in a waterproof container attached to the inside wall of my garage, connected by buried wires to the valve system. The final element of my preparation involved documentation. I installed 3 small weatherproof cameras with night vision capability, one focused on my water spigot, one on the connection point where the fence line met Corinne's yard, and one with a partial view of her hot tub area. These would provide irrefutable evidence of both the theft and the consequences. With everything in place, I ran a series of tests using normal water flow patterns, watering my garden, filling a bucket, running a sprinkler. In each case, the system correctly allowed clean water to flow without triggering the switch. Only when I simulated the specific pattern of hot tub filling, high-volume continuous flow for more than 15 minutes, did the system activate, switching from clean water to the treated water in the drum. Satisfied that everything was functioning properly, I cleaned up all evidence of my work and went to bed just as the first light of dawn began to brighten the eastern sky. Now came the hardest part, waiting. For the next 3 days, I monitored the system constantly. Each morning before work, I checked all connections and verified that the cameras were functioning. Each evening, I reviewed footage to see if Corinne had made her move while I was away. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I found myself checking my phone throughout the day, half expecting to see a notification that water flow had been detected. During those days of waiting, I also wrestled with my conscience. Was I going too far? Should I disable the system and try once more to resolve this through official channels? But each time these doubts surfaced, I reminded myself of the months of theft, the hundreds of dollars stolen, the harassment, and the complete failure of the HOA and legal system to help me. This was not revenge, I told myself. It was a practical solution to a problem that no one else would solve. On Saturday morning, my vigilance was rewarded. At 9:17 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the camera monitoring my water spigot. I opened the app to see Corinne, dressed in designer workout clothes, carefully connecting her green hose to my outdoor faucet. She glanced around furtively before turning the handle to start the water flow. Then she quickly retreated to her yard, hiding the hose along the fence line just as she had done dozens of times before. My heart raced as I watched on a second camera as she began preparations for what appeared to be another hot tub gathering. She arranged plush towels on deck chairs, set up a small table with wine glasses and a cooler, and tested the hot tub controls. All the while, my water flowed steadily into her tub. After 18 minutes of continuous flow, just 3 minutes shy of the trigger threshold, the system detected the signature pattern of hot tub filling. A small green light on my control panel switched to red, indicating that the valve had activated. Clean water stopped flowing, and the pump began drawing from the special reservoir instead. I watched, scarcely breathing, as the treated water began flowing into Corinne's hot tub. From a distance, it looked no different from regular water. The coloring agents I had added were subtle, just enough to create a slightly murky appearance that would be attributed to the hot tub chemicals rather than the water source. For almost 40 minutes, the hot tub filled with the treated water. Corinne checked it periodically, adding her own chemicals and adjusting the temperature, completely unaware of what was actually filling her luxury spa. When the tub was full, she turned off the water at my spigot and disconnected the hose, hiding it once again along the fence line. By early afternoon, cars began arriving at Corinne's house. From my window, I counted 5 guests, 2 couples and a single woman, all carrying small bags and dressed for a spa day. Corinne greeted them enthusiastically, directing them toward the backyard where champagne and the hot tub awaited. I settled into a chair in my home office, camera feeds displayed on my computer monitor. The ethical questions that had plagued me earlier were now replaced by a strange calm. I was simply an observer now, watching as the inevitable consequences of Corinne's actions unfolded before me. As her guests changed into swimwear and gathered around the hot tub, I felt no joy, no excitement, just the quiet certainty that justice, denied through proper channels, would now be delivered through pipes of my own design. The hot tub jets activated, churning the water into a frothy blur, and one by one, Corinne and her friends stepped into their afternoon of relaxation, completely unaware of what awaited them in the warm, bubbling waters. The scene that unfolded on my security camera feed was both exactly what I had anticipated and somehow more dramatic than I could have imagined. Corinne and her 5 guests eased themselves into the hot tub with satisfied sighs, champagne flutes delicately held above the bubbling water. They clinked glasses in a toast to what they clearly expected to be a pleasant afternoon of relaxation and gossip. For approximately 3 minutes, everything seemed normal. They sipped their drinks, laughed at some joke I could not hear, and settled deeper into the water. Then the first sign of trouble appeared. One of the men wrinkled his nose and looked down at the water with confusion. He said something to the others, who initially dismissed his concern with casual waves of their hands. But within another minute, everyone was sniffing the air. Corinne leaned forward and peered into the water, her expression shifting from confusion to disgust. As the jets continued to churn the water, the subtle additives I had included became more noticeable, releasing their full bouquet of aromas into the steam rising from the surface. The realization did not hit everyone simultaneously. One woman stood up first, her face contorted in horror as she looked down at the increasingly murky water. She said something urgent to the others, gesturing frantically at the tub. For a moment, the others stared at her in disbelief. Then, as if on cue, understanding dawned on all their faces at once. What followed was chaos in its purest form. Bodies lunged toward the edges of the tub, slipping and colliding with each other in their desperation to escape. Champagne glasses flew, expensive swimwear was forgotten, and dignity abandoned as they scrambled to exit the fouled water. One man fell onto the deck, sliding across the wet surface before scrambling to his feet and making a beeline for the outdoor shower. The women were screaming, the men cursing. Everyone was frantically splashing themselves with clean water from anywhere they could find it. The outdoor shower, a garden hose, even the water from the decorative fountain in Corinne's garden. Their collective disgust and horror were palpable even through the silent video feed. Corinne's reaction shifted the fastest from shock to rage. Still dripping with the contaminated water, she spun toward my house, her face a mask of fury. She knew. Without a word to her guests, she wrapped herself in a towel and stormed across her yard, through the gate in the fence, and onto my property. I had anticipated this moment and was prepared. I gathered my evidence folder and calmly walked to my front door, opening it just as Corinne reached my porch. "You," she screamed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this. You contaminated my hot tub. I am calling the police right now and having you arrested for assault." I remained perfectly calm. "Good afternoon, Corinne. Before you make that call, you might want to see what I have here." I held up my folder of evidence. "I do not care about your stupid papers. You put sewage in my hot tub. You poisoned me and my friends." Her voice was shrill enough to attract attention from other neighbors, who were beginning to peek out their windows at the commotion. "What I have here," I continued steadily, "is documentation of you stealing water from my property for the past 4 months. I have photographs, video recordings, and copies of my water bills showing the theft. I also have footage of you damaging my security camera. That is vandalism and destruction of property." Corinne's face flushed deeper red. "You cannot prove anything, and it does not justify what you did today." "What did I do exactly?" I asked innocently. "Modify the plumbing on my own property. That is perfectly legal. If someone connects to my water line without permission and takes whatever comes out of it, that is hardly my responsibility." "It was sewage," she shrieked. "It was not sewage," I corrected her. "It was regular water with legal, non-toxic additives that happen to smell unpleasant. No different from the chemicals you put in your hot tub, actually. I have the receipts and safety data sheets for everything I used." I patted the folder. "Also included here is a calculation of exactly how much you owe me for the stolen water, which comes to $643.87. Corinne's eyes narrowed. "I am still calling the police and suing you for everything you have." "That is certainly your right," I agreed. "And when you do, I will be sharing all of this documentation with them, along with the additional information about the HOA violations you have been fabricating against me as harassment. Did you know that utility theft over $500 is a felony in this state, and that using an official position for personal vendettas constitutes abuse of power?" The color drained from Corinne's face as the legal reality of her situation began to sink in. For the first time since I had known her, she seemed at a loss for words. Behind her, I could see her guests hurriedly leaving her property, wrapped in towels and looking thoroughly disgusted. "You would not," she finally managed to say, but the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her. "I would prefer not to," I replied truthfully. "All I have ever wanted was for the water theft to stop and to be compensated for what was taken. The choice of how this proceeds is entirely up to you." For several long moments, Corinne stood dripping on my porch, internal calculations clearly running behind her eyes. Finally, without another word, she turned and walked stiffly back to her house. As she retreated, I noticed several neighbors watching the scene unfold from their yards and windows. The power dynamic that had defined our neighborhood for years had just shifted dramatically, and everyone knew it. News of what happened spread through Oakwood Heights with astonishing speed. By Sunday morning, my phone was buzzing with text messages and calls from neighbors I had barely spoken with before. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. First, confirming what they had heard about Corinne's hot tub disaster, then sharing their own stories of her tyranny and abuse of power. "She fined me $200 because my Christmas lights were up 2 days past the deadline last year," confessed Bill from 3 doors down. "My wife was in the hospital with pneumonia, and I was literally sleeping at her bedside instead of taking down decorations. She reported my son's basketball hoop as an unauthorized structure the day after he beat her son at a school game," shared Lisa from across the street. Story after story emerged, painting a clear picture of years of petty vengeance and power abuse that had gone unchecked because everyone was too intimidated to stand up to her. My action, however unorthodox, had broken the spell of fear that Karen had cast over our community. Karen herself attempted damage control through a neighborhood email claiming that I had maliciously tampered with community water lines and that she was considering legal options to protect resident safety. Her message was met with a deafening silence. No one rose to her defense or expressed outrage on her behalf. 3 days after the hot tub incident, the HOA secretary called an emergency board meeting. The official agenda listed discussion of recent neighborhood disputes and water usage policies, but everyone understood the real purpose. The meeting room at the community center was packed, with homeowners standing along the walls after all the chairs were filled. When Karen arrived, attempting to take her usual position at the head of the table, the HOA vice president gently suggested she sit in the general audience section instead. Her face flushed with anger, but she complied, sitting rigidly in the back row. For the next 2 hours, resident after resident stood up to share their experiences with Karen's leadership. The stories ranged from arbitrary rule enforcement to clear cases of personal vendetta. Documentation was presented, emails, violation notices, photographs, all building an overwhelming case of abuse of power. I presented my own evidence calmly and factually, detailing the water theft, the harassment that followed my complaint, and my multiple attempts to resolve the issue through proper channels. When asked about the hot tub incident, I acknowledged modifying my own plumbing system, but emphasized that I had not trespassed on Karen's property or forced anyone to use the water.